His profile may run into good number of pages, so I'll be very brief due to paucity of time. Shivashankar Babu is a techno-functional banker with a passion for mentoring, travel, and heritage awareness. He is a heritage enthusiast with passion for Indian history, its ancient commerce, temple, architecture, epigraphy, and iconography. He has attended courses in ancient scripts like Tamil, Brahmi, Grantham, uh, Vattalettu, to read inscription, and at present studying PG diploma in archaeology from International Institute of Tamil Studies, Chennai. He's also working on entry-level guide for beginners on Tamil Nadu architecture, features and developments to be released soon. He's part of Tamil Heritage Trust, THT, which is a famous trust, which focuses on spreading heritage awareness. He is one of the TST trained docent guide for Mavalipuram and Kanchipuram. He is involved in education for 6 to 7 days in prior 6 months, and completion of them as tour guidebook for on-site station. Covered Bhubaneswar, Badami, Sanchi, Kanchi, Tanjavur so far. He also does presentations on heritage subjects like architecture, iconography, ancient trade, on prestigious groups like Stapati, Kala Parishad, etc. And videos are available on his YouTube, Babu for Heritage. You can have the joy of heritage at this YouTube link that will be shared. Okay, one second. His YouTube channel, Babu for Heritage, is a go-to place for heritage videos where curated content is available across 50 plus categories. He has traveled through Tamil Nadu, land of temples, and these are documented in detail in his Facebook albums. After 15 years in Indian Overseas Bank, he worked in ITES in companies like Hexaware, Wipro, Capgemini for 20 years, for past 4 years doing domain consulting through his own company, Techno Bankers. Babu is actively giving back to the society through the volunteering efforts in these projects. He handles mentoring sessions for final year BE students of campus placement in leading institutions like SRM University, National Engineering College, Kovilpatti, St. Xavier's Catholic College, Nagarkoil, etc. Supporting final year placements guidance for IIT Madras, sessions on industry expectations, CV preparation and mock interviews are some other activities he's into. With that very brief profile reading, I've only tried to I have tried to make justice to his profile. Over to you, sir. It is really great opportunity and a chance for us to listen to you. And this has been a waiting period for us actually. And since the participants are from Pan India, it's a mixed group. They would surely enjoy your discourse. Over to you, sir, Shivashankar Babu, sir. Thank you for coming here. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, can you stop the sharing, please?
Yes, sir. I stopped.
Okay. Good evening, all. Welcome to a pleasant weekend, starting with a very good discussion. And before we start the talk, let me thank the IITTM authorities for giving me one more chance to spread about the heritage richness of our country and bring more people into the award list. Thank you for Mr. Saravanan and Sanjay Reddy for giving me the option and then giving me a good platform to spread the heritage. Today, we are going to discuss about an interesting topic. This might be for 1 hour or 1 hour 15 minutes, depending on the audience interaction. I am okay for taking questions. Let me share. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So before we start, I request all of you to put your video off and the audio on mute so that it is easy and we are able to go in an undisturbed manner without any issues. Are you able to see the picture and my video, my face video on the background? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you. So in between, if any issues come, you can ping me on chat or you can call me on WhatsApp. So today, the subject is know your culture or heritage through temples. In a way, this is about what our temples tell us in terms of various stories relating to our history, our heritage, our local culture, how that particular temple grown. So like this picture, this is going to be a bird's eye view. If we talk about this in detail, it is going to take 3 hours, 4 hours. So what I'm going to do in this is briefly touch upon various areas where you will be able to explore further in detail and learn a lot about our temples. Before we go into the details, I would like to thank the references which helped me making this presentation. First of all, let me thank Google Andor for the references, images, and basic content. And the next one is Wikipedia, which gives a fairly good collation of articles reference. The interesting thing about Wikipedia is it gives a lot of reference books and journals for us to go through and understand the things in detail. In terms of iconography, I have referred to T.A. Gopinath Rao book, which is a primary source of reference. And for scripting, epigraphy, Sivaramamurthy book on South Indian scripts was a good inspiration. For agamas and then iconography and some of the temple architecture, my guru, Shankara Narayananji, who is a Sanskrit head of department in Tirupati All India University. So he has been a source of inspiration and guide for all of us. We learned a lot from him. Regarding temple architecture, form, structure, and aggregation, Adam Hardy's work is an inspiration. Many of his pictures have been used in this with his permission, and it is a very simple way of explaining complex concepts. Again, this comes based on our experience. I am part of Tamil Heritage Trust, a heritage organization out of Chennai. We conduct one-day workshop called How to See a Temple. Primarily, it involves one full day, 4 lectures on different aspects of this. And at the evening, we take the participants, around 30 to 40 people, around a temple and then explain things in detail in real time. For example, Mylapore temple or something. And then whatever was explained in the 4 sessions will be shown in real. So this preparing and then helping on this activity has helped me in putting the contents in proper perspective. So next, to whom, to what, when, and how we are going to do this. First of all, the target audience, I presume, is IITM students and people who are interested in heritage and across India. So I am I'm going to talk this in English, and I'm not going to talk about explain Hindu Dharma or Purana basics or great kings of India, which I presume you'll be knowing. What I'm going to talk about today in this presentation is a brief about evolution of Hindu gods and brief about how temples evolved. What is the basic architecture of the temple we should be looking for, and what type of sculptures are there, and then how you see and classify them, and how do we change the inscriptions. Mr. Anil Kumar, can you put on mute? So, after attending this session and going through things in detail, little more after doing your research, you should, Mr. Anil Kumar, can you put this on mute, please? So after listening to this, you should be able to understand the timeline of which component, how the Garbhagriha was developed, and when the mandabas were developed, when the Gopura was developed. And looking at the deities, you should be able to see this belongs to a 12th century or 7th century, because you know this deity came only in 12th century. And you should be able to identify the components of the temples, and then who built this temple components, because the earlier temples were built as small temples, and during a later period, many of the components were expanded by the later kings. So you'll be able to identify the kings, and you should be able to spot the inscriptions and at least know that these are things to be protected. And you should be able to see the sculptures and see what kind of stories they tell, and also understand in what all different ways in which a temple was used. So this is the objective with which we are trying to give this talk. So please take a notes of some of the points and then try to do your exploration in web based on some of the references I'm giving. So for people who are interested in further reading, you can refer some of the basic books or reference textbooks, Element of Indian Arts by S.P. Gupta, and Indian Temple Architecture, Adam Hardy. It's a costly book, but you can search for his articles in web, and then they give very good understanding on the contents. And the Hindu Iconography by Gopinath Rao, a virtual textbook reference, and Art of India by Stella Kramrisch. It's a good book describing the various periods and how art developed. So with this, we go into the actual presentation. Before we go, our prayer. Whenever we talk about a serial or a movie, we talk more about the director rather than the sponsor comes in the first 5 minutes advertisement producer, but we talk more about the director or actor. But unfortunately, when it comes to the temples, we talk about the kings who made this happen, but we forget the actual creators, the Shilpis. So our pranams to the Shilpis who made this Devalayas. Being an Vishwakarma Shilpi is not a simple job. It doesn't require a simple BE degree in architecture or in civil or mechanical engineering. He needs to know so many things. Like he needs to be needs to know the facial expression, and then talamana, measurements between body parts, body language, the ornament designs, dance mudras, abhaya mudra, and all these things, structural engineering to do the temple architecture, geology, rock types. If you choose the wrong type of rock, and the entire temple will crumble. And then you need to have the right kind of tools of chisel and other things. And the zoology is a must, because how to portray the lions, the monkeys, elephants on the right proportion. Chemistry is required because most of the earlier sculptures were colored. And now the latest technologies, the current trend of the Shilpis, need to have AutoCAD, Lightroom, Photoshop to manipulate things and make it happen. So it is not an easy job to come up to a Vishwakarma Shilpi. So we pranam the great Shilpis who made this happen. Now, before we go into the actual temple, let us see how the worshipping the supreme force, the God, evolved over a period of time. What we see in this picture is a very old form of worship where you put a single pool and then build a enclosure around it out of simple branches and then build a small temple on this. This is there in most of the tribals. It is called Kandu and worshipping a pole. This is what some people say that it is evolved into Linga worship and then expanded into further refinements. This is how it started. Let us see how it evolved over various periods and then how the worship and the places of worship evolved from ages. During the Rock Age and Stone Age and beyond, the early man worshiped nature. This is what he could see. This is what he couldn't understand. So he had worshipping for the things which are unknown to him, like the sun, the moon, mountains, rivers. So the natural things over which he don't have any control, there is the primary objects of worship. Then later on, during Rock Age and other things, once he started inventing weapons, the guy who has got the weapon is the king or the leader, and the weapons started becoming the worshipping objects. So he worshipped weapons in open or in the natural caves, and later on it gradually shifted to idol kind of worship. When he shifted from the mountains to plains and then started coming out of going into the nomad kind of life and started farming, this is where the temple started developed under trees with or without a roof. You can still, in many of the rural villages, you can see a temple under the tree. And later on, like his house dwellings in the plains, the temples also got evolved into wood, mortar, brick, and other things. This is where lot of some structure and some rules started forming, and then there were oral. There were no documented things. The agamas and other structures were there, but they were rudimentary, and then they got handed over from generation to generation. Later on, people started doing caves. So going back to their the earlier place, okay, once they have got a perfection on the tooling technology, they started cutting in rocks and convert them into caves and then started worshipping in the caves. So this was prevalent during 3rd BC, 2nd BC and 1st BC, and many of the caves were during Buddha and Jaina period, and later on the trends continued. And in south and in north, in some of the places, they took rock and then cut a whole mountain or rock and then made complete temples out of a single stone, monoliths. Later on, only around 7th century, he was tired of running around looking for mountains and rocks far away from his building. And then he started cutting stones into small chunks and then he experted the way it can be structured into a temple, like how he built the wooden mortar and brick kind of temples earlier. So this is the major turnaround point, and this is what we see nowadays. Most of the temples we see are stone usage temples. And then later on, there are Ashtanga temples where it's tier 2 tier, 3 tier kind of temples with advanced technologies. And finally, the latest is the concrete temples where you can build any shape, any size, any volume, and ultimate flexibility. But which ones we see? We don't see all these things till now, because whatever is done under wood, mortar, and brick usage, okay, its life is around 200 max, and it becomes brittle, it becomes fallen down. And later on, when during 7th, 8th centuries, when stone usage was found, most of these temples, whatever is standing, was converted into stone temples. So one of the oldest wood, brick, and mortar temples we see is in Mahabalipuram, which was exposed during tsunami in 2005. This is a 8th century Pallava period temple, but the base, foundation, and other structure is 3rd, 4th, or 5th century different bricks. So this is one of the oldest known temple structures in South India. So from here, the growth is all the way up to concrete, and some of the ultimate temples. The one you see here is Murdeshwar. You got a fantastic giant, the second biggest Shiva idol in India. And this has got a big museum temple complex inside Shiva idol. This Gopura is complete concrete, 22 stories, and around 240 feet. It has got a lift going from here to the top where we can see the entire panorama. So this is how it has progressed from a small stick to the lift. Now, let us see how the temple units expanded. Early temples, like the Deoghar temple here, this is a simple structure, rectangle structure, and then with a superstructure or a tower on top of it. That's all. From there, it expanded. It added more mandabas, more structure, more area, and then finally it came up to this kind of one level. Can you identify the sanctum here? This is somewhere over here. This is the sanctum. And you can imagine the area, so many mandabas, so many small gopurams, and then mini vimanas for multiple sanctum and a grand area. So it's almost like a temple city. So this is how it has evolved. And let us see how it has evolved over a period. Before we go into the details, let us understand the basic components of the temple. Still people, some of them are still having confusion over what is Gopura and what is Vimana. And then temple, Gopura, Vimana, all the three, they talk in terms. A temple is a complex which contains multiple components. The Vimana is the tower or the enclosure where the primary god resides in this, and then there is a spire building and with a superstructure. So this is Vimana. Gopuram is almost similar to Vimana. Only thing is there is no enclosed space. It is only an entrance in the outer side. But many of the components of Gopuram and Vimanam are almost same. In early period, the Vimanas used to be bigger and Gopuras were smaller. But somewhere around 10th century, no further development of Vimanas took place, and the Gopurams, later period Gopurams, have become larger and taller. Apart from that, the third major component of any temple is the Mandapa. What is the difference between Vimana and Mandapa? Mandapa is normally a structure where the devotees stand and then worship the god. And also the gods come in, and lot of functions and then pujas, everything happens in this enclosed space. If you see the Vimana or Garbhagraha, it is a sanctified space and energized by mantras and a lot of Vedic chants are done. So normally in South Indian temples, only the certified pujari of the temple is allowed to go into the sanctum. Nobody else is allowed, and then nobody can touch the actual idol. But in North India, there is fairly relaxed atmosphere where you can go into the Garbhagriha, and then we can actually touch the linga and then worship. So there are two streams of that. Here, the parts of a temple are equated to the chakras of a human body, and this is how it is mapped. Mooladhara to Dvajastambha, Swadhisthana to Balipida, Manipura, and the Anya Chakra is equivalent to the Garbhagriha. And Sahasrara is equivalent to the top of the Vibhana. So this is how ancient forefathers visualized temple similar to a person lying, and then that is how they designed it. Looking at it from a different angle, the temple is also a collection of multiple Sthula Lingas, particularly Shiva temples. Gopuram is equal to a Sthula Linga. The circular is a Sthula Linga, and Dvajastambham is termed as a Dvaja Linga. And Balipida is called a Bhadralinga. There is where we surrender all our avaris and all our thoughts, and then go with only good thoughts into the temple. And the Moola Lingam is equal, the Garbhagriha is equal to the Moola Lingam, and the superstructure is equal to the Akanta Lingam as a Paramatma. So this is the philosophical representation of a temple and its components as parts of various lingas. So here also we can compare this with the chakras, Ajna, Visuddha, Anahata, Manipura, Swadhisthana, Mooladhara chakras. And let us see how it maps with the actual components of the temple. So if you see this, I'm mapping it against the Tanjore big temple. So you see the feet near the Gopura, and the chakras matching, and the Anya chakra is in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and this one is near the Ardha Mandapa. This is near the Mahamandapa. So it matches in a way visualized by our forefathers and designers. Now, let us see how these things expanded into a grand. What you see here is a massive expanse. This is the Srirangam temple in near Trichy in Tamil Nadu, which is the largest temple complex in the world. And of course, Angkor is bigger, but it is not under active worship. This has got references from ages from 3rd century BCE to current, and it has got 21 gopurams all over the place. And the tallest one, this one, is 240 feet, the tallest gopuram in this. And it has got huge collection of small temples. Can you identify the sanctum here? Tough job. Probably we can go from here and try to enter like this. You cross 7 gopurams, and finally somewhere over here is a sanctum. This entire area is a city where buses fly inside, and then it was used as a fort in some of the wars, and then this was a fortified town by itself. So this is how temples have grown. Let us see some perspective into the temples, where they stand, and then what is the size and the biggest of the temples. Let us see in terms of gopurams. This lists the top 10 gopurams of India in terms of height. So obviously we see the Srirangam temple, which we saw now, is the tallest, 240 feet. And the next one we saw in the other picture, Murdeshwar, which is very recent, which is the tallest. If you see the 10 list, out of 10, 9 are in Tamil Nadu only. This is an interesting aspect. Second, let us see the list of top 10 Vimanas. And the Chadurbhuj Jhansi Orcha takes a cake with 344 feet tall. And the next one is Kasi Viswanatha temple. Again, it is a new one, 250. If you see the old temples, it is Tanjore which takes the cake, and then Puri Jagannath almost equivalent. Lingaraja and Gangaikonda Chodappuram taking the next batch. Konark, Tirubhuvanam and Kandaria, all this taking the next batch. So if you see most of this, all the old temples, all the old ones are in South India, except Chhatrapati, which survived somehow. Again, Chhatrapati was around 14th century. The others survived. And if you see that, 4 of the tallest ones are in Tamil Nadu. Let us see temples in terms of area. Top 10 areas in worship. Again, Srirangam, which we saw now, is the largest in India and almost in worship, largest in the world. Next, many are Akshardham, Chhatarpur, Belur, Dakshineshwar is there, but all of them are fairly new in this century or 2 or 3 centuries earlier. If you see the older temples, almost all of the big temples are in Tamil Nadu. All the white ones are in Tamil Nadu. This is again an interesting perspective. So let us take a look at the monuments. In Tamil Nadu, we have around 44,000 monuments, out of which the 3,500 are under active control of government and around 5,000 in an autonomous way. All these temples are more than 100 years old. Okay. Similarly, Karnataka has 28, Andhra Pradesh 38,000, Karnataka, Kerala 34, Maharashtra 45, Odisha 33. So below Vindhyas on the Dakshin triangle, we have around 222,000 temples. Surprisingly, North should have had more in the Gangetic and in the Sindhu plain. But unfortunately, due to the continued invasion and the external ruling, most of the temples were demolished, converted into mosques or other worships, and it is not predominant. Particularly if you see Tamil Nadu, except 2 incidences, like during 5th century, Calabra rule was there for 100 years, and during 13th century, Sultan invasion from north is there. Apart from that, till the 18th century, till British took over, it was under Hindu rulers, and then it was peaceful. Most of the temples survived as it is. So this explains why many of the big temples are still in South India, Tamil Nadu and South India, and that's why it is called the land of temples. And another interesting factor is, if you calculate on the population, I think Tamil Nadu has got 1 temple for every 3 square kilometer area, and 1 temple for every 1,500 people. For example, if you take an average apartment complex of around 400 houses, then it is eligible for 1 temple. That is the kind of dense population we have. So with this, we should be able to go into the temple and then explore what kind of heritage these temples have and what we can understand from them. So let us see how these temples evolved over a period under various dynasties, and for each of these period, what are the additions that happened across all the things. Here I am taking Tamil Nadu as an example for a specific reason, but during other areas, north or in, west or so on, there are similar dynasties, but the evolution of the structures are almost same. Earlier, till 5th century, most of the temples were used brick and mortar. That is during Sangam era and Chera Chola Pandyas. So around 600 to 900 CE, Tamil Nadu, Pallavas and Pandyas were there. So there is where the cut-in caves, monoliths and the structural rock temples started developing. Basically, they were small single cells, and then they expanded into multiple areas. The next in line is the Imperial Cholas, who ruled from 850 to 1150. There is a period where grand vimanas, big vimanas, a lot of wall ornamentation, multiple mandabas started thing, and many other old temples were converted into granite. And later on, during Pandya's period, this is 1100 to 1350, and since the vimanas and mandabas are fairly developed, they started focusing on expanding the prakaras, mandabas, and gopuras also started becoming beautiful. Later on, after the Muslim invasion and then going into the uh, demolition, there was a period of recovery, and the Vijayanagara Empire, which was at one time ruling the entire South India till 1600, they recovered most of the temples, and then they started building high-rise walls and then gopurams and mandapams, and then did a lot of roofing. So when you see a mandapa, beautiful mandapa in front of the temple, you can close your eyes and say that it is not Pandya or Chola, it is only Vijayanagara. So this is how you will be able to differentiate about the various components and do it. Later on, beyond 1800, the Nayakas and Nagaratar, the local Chettiars, they developed a lot of new areas, expanded the temples into big towns, and then built a lot of temple tanks, 1,000-pillar mandapas. So if you see a 1,000-pillar mandapa, it is mostly Nayaka period. So this is how we understand the development of a temple over a period. So by looking at the temple, the component, you will be able to visualize the history of the temple, of how it is grown. Now, having seen the temple, let us go deep and then see the Vimana, the more focused sanctum of the god. Vimanas are the temples have been in existence since ages, and some of the Sanchi and other pillars during the 1st and 2nd centuries, they also depict various types of vimanas like we are seeing here. You see the shapes, the arches, kudus, and then square, and then windows, all these things. So all the knowledge they had on this was reflected in the initial temples. Before we go into the temple Vimana components, let us talk about the components and how the philosophy of the base structure and the components was developed during 3 major shapes. The first one is the Nagara shape, basically square and rectangle, and this signifies Brahma and then Sattva kind of an guna. So basically the plan as well as the component and the shikara and everything was in a square or in a rectangle shape. This is the first top. The second component is the Dravida shape. This is hexagon, octagon, which is signifying Vishnu, and Rajasya, or the maintaining guna of character. So the character, the god, and the aspect were in sync for most of the temples. The third aspect is the Vesara shape. This is circle, endless circle eclipse or apsidal form, which is attributed to Shiva character or a Tamasa character. So if you see most of the temples, the base plan will be any one of this. The structure or the wall will be in any one of the shape, and the shikara will be of the same shape. So some of the temples might be having square base, but the shikara may be circular or an octagon, or it can be a combination. It can be a pure circular or pure rectangle temple, or it can be a combination. So if you understand the basic shape, it is easy to distinguish on what type of a temple it is. Earlier, people used to live in various shapes of huts and conical, wagon shape and other thing. So many of the early single cell temples were of this type, like square plan with a square top, or a square plan with a shaped hut type of top, or a square plan with a circular amalaka type of a top. This is the basic temples. Or apsidal type. This is rectangle plus half square. Apsidal type base plan and the apsidal shikara, or square with a polygon type of a top, which is typical Dravida, and then a rectangle type of a thing with a wagon top. This is normally meant for Shakti temples, Sakas. This is for Ganapati, normally meant for Ganapati. So interestingly, all these 6 basic forms are represented in monolithical rathas in Malay. You can see an example. This is represented by Valayan Kuttai, and this is represented by Draupadi Ratha. See the shape here. And then this is a small temple in Shore Temple complex with a circular top. And this is Nakula Sakadeva Ratham, which is apsidal component. And Dharmaraja Ratham, yes, it's classical Dravida temple with this kind of wagon. And then this is wagon top, this is Ganesha Ratha. So if you come to Malay, you will be able to see Mahabalipuram, you will be able to see the entire growth of temple architecture from basic temple to the modern temple. Let us see these. So far we see the basic components of small temples. When the temple becomes bigger, you can't just like that make it bigger and bigger. It won't stand and it will look ugly. So how did they aggregate into bigger temples? The kind of temples we see. This is a basic Dravida type of a temple from South India. So these are basically square base, pyramidal roof, and multiple tiers like this. And then this tiers consisting of the mini temple, square temple, rectangle, or apsidal temple in a layer. So there will be multiple layers. So how they expanded on this is have a central temple, and they kept on adding tiers like the square temple or a rectangular temple or an apsidal temple. They join units in layers so that it looks like a horizontal layer building kind of. This is how they aggregate. By aggregating this, your base is becoming bigger, you can build taller temples. So let us see how in North India they achieve the same design. North Indian temples are slightly in a different way. They are vertical alignment. So you instead of horizontal alignment, they are vertical alignments, and then they are called rekas, reka or lines. So this vertical alignment, how did they? This is primarily a cruciform kind of an base. This is cruciform means plus kind of thing, and with the convex curving roof, with the many temples of varying heights added to this. So when you expand this temple and add more components, this is how it is aggregated. So you have the basic temple, you add 4 mini temples to 4 sides, and then again 4 more mini temples to the sides. Like that, you keep on expanding. This is the way where your base is expanded and you can raise it to a greater height. And there is another style which is called Vesara, which is in the central area, where they borrow from both this design. They have circular apsidal star bases, and then it's a mix of Nagara as well as Dravida roofs, and they have multiple sanctums under the same roof, and different structures are there. So this is how the temples got bigger by adding components. Let us see how the temples grew in North India. So the first phase is 5th to 6th century CE, where a flat square temple is there, no top, no superstructure. The second level, a pyramidal structure comes in. Pyramidal structure comes in as a superstructure. And then if you see this, there is no sync between this and that. Later on, 9th to 10th centuries, you have a beautiful curvilinear shikaras with Anga shikaras, the components. But if you see, this is from top up to the bottom, it is perfectly aligned with the beautiful continuation of the vertical integration. Now we go into horizontal consolidation. The same components, this is the Kandariya Mahadev around 10th century. We had more and more smaller temples, have 2 or 3 mandabas. So we achieve the Mahameru kind of structure from Tahal to this. It looks like a Mahameru. So this is the pinnacle of North Indian temple architecture. So this is how from 5th century to 12th century, the temple architecture got defined. Now let us see the basic components of a temple. We'll be seeing both Dravida as well as Nagara temple. Why you should learn about components? Okay, primarily because we should be able to say, I saw a temple. That part was, bottom part was really good, and then this one looked very cute. So instead of talking like this, if you understand the basic parts, you will be able to explain, you will be able to read more journals, and you will be able to understand the talk of people who are giving the explanation at the higher level. So it always helps you. It is not a complex thing. Ultimately, the components of temple and house are the same. It is like human body. So, like a human body, the temple as well as the house are also visualized with the same components. Let us see how. We have 6 major components of a human body. The first one is legs. This is called Adhisthana in temple format. If you see the house, this is the base. The second one, the body part, and this is called Bitti. Bitti or wall in temple architecture. We see the same wall here also. The third one is the chest part, which is called the roof or prastara in a temple, and this is where you see the roof part in a house. Fourth one is the neck. Where is the neck here? This is the neck. The neck here, and the same, the neck part or the projection, inward projection part is here in a house. This is called Grivam. The fifth one is the head. Is called Shikara here, and this is the top of the thing. Usually the water tank and other things will be the top of the thing. That is a Shikara. So after that, your head, your hair and cap and everything is this crown or a stupi. We have the stupi here. And where is the stupi in a house? Normally your dishantana is going to be your stupi for a house. So looking back, you will be, these are the 6 basic components of any temple. This is called Shatanka temple. This is how it is represented in the South Indian temple architecture. So if you remember the basic parts, it is very easy to explain the temple in multiple components. You can say square plan and then rectangular shikara and with round griva, walls with the 3 partitions, Bitti with 3 partitions, and you will be able to explain the temple in a better way. Let us see how it is defined in North Indian style. Here we have 2 major styles, Latina and Famsana. Latina is a vertical style like this, and Famsana is almost like a South Indian, where it is a lattice tier structure together like a clean pyramid. So in both, the terms are almost equivalent. You have the foundation Gopita, the basement part, and the Janga. This again, this is called wall. And this is the kapota or cornice, which is part of the shoulder component. And the Shukanasi is like the heart or the main exposure. And this is the vertical layer, Madhyalata. And this is how you have multiple bhumis or layers one by one. And this is your throat, Gala. It is called Gala in North Indian. And the Shikara is called Amalaka or dome. And we have the finium. So if you see, again, the major base parts are your basement, wall, and your roof, and your throat, dome, kalasa, and all are same here, but are used by describing in different terminology. And if you understand the basics, you will be able to remember this. Next step, we are going into personification of characters of gods. Let us see how the gods evolved over a period of time. This will help you in understanding. If you see a god, then a god or an ideal form, you will know which period it came in, which period it faded out. It is easy to visualize and understand based on this. So earlier, people were, like I explained earlier, worshipping nature and weapon only. During Vedic period, mantras and yajnas were the prime one. There were many gods. Agni, Indra, Varuna were primary one. Surya, Prithvi, Pusan. Interestingly, Vishnu and Rudra, the Shiva form, were last in the queue, not primary gods. But during 3rd century BC, a lot of reorganization was taking place. New gods came in. In South India, these were split into 3 major types of lands: hills, forests, plains, coastal. And accordingly, Muruga, Vishnu, Indra, Varuna, and Kottari were the prime deities during the period. Later on, around 6th, 5th centuries, the Panchayatana concept came in, where the Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti, Ganapati, Surya are there. So if you see most of the North Indian temples, the primary deity will be there, and around that, the remaining 4 deities will be housed in the smaller shrines around the main deity. In South, they also added Komaram, which is related to Skanda. So we had Shanmada. Shanmada means 6 matas relating to Shiva, Vishnu, Parvati, Ganapati, Surya, and Skanda. Later on, after 6th, 7th centuries, so the religions got, the sects got integrated, and then integrated forms also started appearing. Somaskanda, combining Shiva, Parvati, and Skanda. Harihara mixing Shiva and Vishnu. Artanarisura having Shiva and Parvati. Like that, lot of transformation gods came in. And during 10th to 14th centuries, there was some amount of conflict between Shiva and Vaishnava. This is where a lot of new forms of Shiva and Vishnus are also done with Puranas. Later, during Vijayanagara period, the Renaissance, Vijayanagara kings introduced a lot of aggressive gods to incite the fighting spirit in people. So the forms of Veera Anjaneya, Ugra Narasimha, Kali, Bhairava were given more prominence, and this is the gods. If you see Veera Anjaneya, you can close your eyes and say that it is a Vijayanagara period. So this is how you will be able to visualize the evolution of gods. So, am I audible? Somebody said that there is audio disturbances. Is it there still? Hello?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
No, sir. No, sir.
Now, let us see, delve into the iconography. What do you mean by iconography? Iconography means the definition of gods, the measurements, their ornaments, how they look, and then what are the shapes and the poses they make. So this in full is termed as iconography. What you see here is a picture of Ganapati with detailed measurements and what he should hold and with ratios and other things. How it is mentioned, we'll see little later. So let us see idols, the forms which we worship. What are the basic forms? The first form is formless. It is called Nishkalam. And examples are Vishnu Saligrama. This is worshipped as the Shankar Chakra forms. This is taken on the rock samples found from Nepal, Gomiti River. Or Banalingas. This is put on a pedestal. A lingam like stone is put on a pedestal and then worshipped as Banalinga. And third, the Shivalinga. All these forms are formless. The second component is semi-form. This is Sakara Nishkala, where there is form and there is no form. Good examples are the Mukhalinkas, where the all four faces of Sadasiva are depicted as part of the linga itself. And the fifth face is assumed. This is a full representation, which is one of the oldest Sivalingas available in Gudumallam near Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh. So here, Lord is represented as a hunter on atop a Bhutakana, and which is like a phallus. And this is one of the oldest lingas with the form. And the another form is a Lingodbhava, which is a Tiruvannamalai form where Brahma and Vishnu try to search on the top and bottom of Shiva appearing as a flame. So this is a lingam, and then Shiva appears inside lingam. The third form is the Vyakta form or Sakala form, where the exact form is known. This is Shiva's full form, dancing Nataraja, or Vishnu's form are called Sakala forms. Sakala form means full, you are able to visualize the full form. When you come to Sakala form, there are three more variations based on dimension. One is a single dimension called Chitrabhasa, which is picture. Example given is Tanjore painting. The second one is the Chitrata or the bas relief. The bas relief is primarily two-dimensional, where only one side of the picture is shown and the back is not visible. This is one of the oldest Natarajas from C.A. Mangalam in Tamil Nadu. The third is a three-dimensional complete structure, which is called Chitra, and this is three-plane. And this is a dancing Nataraja given in the CERN European Atomic Research Center. So let us see how these ideals are made up. This will make you understand on how the Abhisheka, Puja, and all the other rituals are done. You might be wondering, for some of the lingas, there is no Abhishekam. Some of the lingas, only certain things are offered. And again, some of this is based on the material on which they have done it. The most popular material is stone, and based on this Hindu, Jaina, everybody used it. Particularly Tamil Nadu earlier period, they had some aversion towards stone, but later on they refined it. They started using stone heavily for idols. The next material is wood. The classic example is your Puri Jagannath temple, and in Kanjipuram Varadaraja also, the earlier idol was made of wood. So now it is buried, and every 40 years it is taken afresh and taken puja and then again buried. Some rare occasions, even metal images are worshipped as prime deities. Example is Chidambaram Nataraja is brass. Singanallur in Coimbatore, the original Urchava Murti was kept as a main idol and then worshipped. Many of the Swayambhu lingas or some of the lingas are shaped out of sand. Prime examples are Rameswaram Lingam, Ekambareswara Kanchi Lingam are made out of sand. So there is a cover on top of it, and mostly many Abhishekams and other things are not performed just to protect this lingam. Other thing option is crystal or jade with this Chidambaram. Chidambaram lingam is a crystal lingam. And the other variety, primarily for big statues and other things, are made of sudai. This is brick and mortar. Srirangam Ranganatha, Thiruvananthapuram, Tirupattur Ranganatha, all of them are made out of brick and mortar. So beautifully covered, colored and other things, but there is no Abhishekam and Puja and other things for this deities. So you will understand why it is so. Another interesting thing is herbal alchemy, like they mix a lot of herbs and then other things with mercury and solidify into a Navapashanam. They call it as Navapashanam, 9 herbs. And the Pioneer Muruga temple is found in this. Again, there is meant that the Abhishekam water coming out of this is very, very beneficial and it is in great demand. So with this, Next time when you go to a temple, observe how the idols and other structures were made. Now, the next view is that in South India or in North India, okay, when you see a Ganapati temple, the traditional Ganapati temple, or you see a Shiva or Parvati, all these shapes look alike and then have a consistency. How they are able to see that you are able to make a consistent sculpture? All the sculptures look almost similar. This is the secret. So they have got a base measurement, and this base measurement is a relative scale. So the distance between your chest and your palm base is called a tala. 1/12 of the tala is a viral, one finger. So this is a relative measure. Okay. So based on this, so suppose if you are going to make an ideal, you decide the length between your forehead and your mouth edge is going to be this much. So all the measurements are based on this underlying measure. So if you take the Ganapati, these are the measures. This is 21 means 12, 0 means 12 viral, and this is 3 viral, this is 9 viral, kind of a thing. So this is the ratios. So all your length, width, thickness, and then your perimeter, and then inner capacity, the vertical height, all these are measured as ratios of this base measure. So this is how a Ganapati, whatever form it is said, whether it is a 2 feet Ganapati or a 10 feet Ganapati, it looks the same. This is all defined in the Agamas. If you see there, Dasatala, there is a ratio between how much body length is there for a given type of a god. So Dasatala is a topmost rank. There is a scale from 10 to 1. The 10 scale, which is the lengthiest one, is primarily meant for Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and primary gods. Navatala is for ladies, Devas, Devis. That's why when you see Shiva and Parvati, Parvati is always little shorter because it is a Navatala or nine parts idol, whereas Shiva is a 10-part idol. When you look at Ashtatala, this is primarily meant for kings and some of the sages. And humans and some of the sages, it is Sapta, eight parts. And Shattala is for humans, and then Vamanas, the dwarfs, will be at Shattala. What about Vinayaka? Vinayaka is Panchatala. That's why he is short and fat. The ratios are different. You see, both the Ganas, they are fixed at Chaturtala, still shorter than Ganapati and fatter. So this is how the standard measurement of ratios and combinations of 10, we are able to define multiple definitions for ideals, and this is how it makes these ideals look alike across multiple temples. Next time when you go and see Urchava Murti or Singh, you watch the relative height and relative width, you will understand this. Okay. Now next, this is already around 45 minutes over. It will take another 15 to 20 minutes. Are you okay with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Mathura. So let us look at one aspect of physical representation of gods. So what you see is a Tadadagai. This is the Parvati represented in Madurai. A legend says that she had 3 breasts, and on seeing the right husband, her central breast will vanish. So when she went to Himalayas to see Shiva, the central one vanished, and she know that he is the right husband for her. So unless you understand the story or Purana, you won't be able to appreciate this idol. So this is what we are going to see, the Puranas. The list is very, very huge. We have Shiva, we have 64 forms. Vishnu, we have 3 variations of forms. The stance by Guna, there is a standing, sitting, and then whether it is a Veera or Sattva or Yoga. So 3 by 4, 12 combinations are possible. And 4 hands, he has 4 weapons. That combination, 24 things are possible. Avatar 10. So somewhere around 46 versions of Vishnu are possible in the minimum. Brahma, he is almost rank outsider. Not many major temples are there. The consorts, Parvati, Durga, Lakshmi, and the sons and then demigods, Navagragas, Ashtadikpalas. Okay, you have so much information to understand. So only when you start understanding this, you will be able to see the Devas. You will need to see differentiate between Gandharvas, Kinnaras, Ganas, and then pacified demons, like demons who have turned into good people. Like many of them are Dwarapalakas or something. And Vaganas. So which god has got which Vahana? So by looking at the Vahana from a distance, you will be able to identify that this is a Shiva temple or a Vishnu temple or a Muruga temple. And the Rishis. And so this is a whole gamut. And once you understand the Puranas and other things, you will be able to see an idol and you will be able to identify that, yes, this is Vishnu and this is this form of Vishnu. This is what you will be able to understand by looking at the idols. Now let us start with Ganapati, the first and foremost god. So he has got 32 forms, with consort, without consort, with multiple heads, Divimukha, Trimukha, 5 mukhas, Teramba, 5 mukhas, and then playful nature and activity by dancing, yoga, and then other things, and the victory-based thing, and then for beneficial, and then Ekashara, single syllable, and then lot of variations are there in Ganapati itself. 32 forms given in some of the later period Agamas. So after some time, you will be able to identify them. And again, interestingly, if you see Ganapati, he is a delight of sculptures or creators. Okay, you have anything. If you see the Bombay Ganapati Puja, Ganapati comes in almost all the varieties. Latest one now with in Corona period, he comes with mask, and then he has got sculpture and other things. He has got thermal reader, and here during cricket period he will come with cricket bat. He will come with computer, all sorts of things. And Ganapati is a god which adapts to any new situation, and we can see the latest definitions. Coming to Shiva, Shiva comes in 2 forms. One is a linga which has got a 3-part, the Brahma part which is square, and then the Vishnu part which is hidden inside the base, which is of 8-sided, and the round circular part which is a Rudrapaga, which is what we see as a pillar on top. Okay, like we saw earlier, this is one of the oldest Shivalingas in Gudimullam. It can be a Mukhalinga, like 4-sided things, and it can be a banded Tara Linga, which is popular in Pallava period. And ultimate of all, the Bhojeshwara Linga, which is the biggest one Linga in the world. So Lingas comes in different shapes and varieties. You should be able to see and explore how it comes. Again, coming to Shiva, it's a thing in mind. It's a god we can visualize, but it's very difficult to map. Complex, very complex. Basically, Shiva is Sadasiva with 5 heads. Satyavijaya, Aghora, Vamana, Isana, and then Tatpurusha. 5 heads on 4 direction in top with attributed things. So for each of these 5 characters, another 5 are spawned in. So total of 25 Sadasiva are the basic murtis. In addition, there are multiple variations. So it takes a total to 64 murtis. So this is the representation of Sadasiva, Maha Sadasiva with the 25 heads. So if you see the thing, the total 64, it is like this. It's a difficult thing to map, and then I try to make it a little more simple. Prakash, you want to say something, or it's... So it can be defined on Avatara, Shritis, Anugraha Murtis, and then Krada form, and then helping form, Antika form, Linga form, Dakshina Murtis, 4 types are there, and then composite Murtis are there. These are all Samhara Murtis, killing Gajaya Samhara, and then Jalandhara Samhara, Kamadahana, and then Avatara killing Vishnu Avatara. So like that, around 64 forms are there. So slowly you will be able to see, understand this, and say that this is this form of Shiva. Again, so much homework and then so much things to explore. Next, let us come to the next complex one, Vishnu. Vishnu basic 10 avatars, which I need not explain. You will be able to identify this as and when you see it. And again, Vishnu has got 4 components, like Shankh, Chakra, and Gada, and 1 Abhaya Mudra. Okay, so based on this relative positioning, you can arrive at 24 different murtis, each one having a different name. This is what I showed you is Janardhana. Like that, there is a grid of 24 murtis. In addition, there are some more things out there. So I'm not going into other gods. I'm just showing 2 critical things which you should be seeing in a temple. These are all Ashtadigbalas, and you'll be able to easily identify them based on the Vahana, the style, and the direction in which they are in. Vayu, Kubera, east and northeast, Indra on east, Agni on southeast, Yama on south. So if you go to the corner of a particular temple, Vimana or Gopuram, or on the Prahara wall, there will be some idols, and then depending on the location, you will be able to clearly identify them as it is Nidhriti or Varuna or Vayu. What you see here is a rooftop depiction of the Ashtadigbalas. The next group comes Navagragas. So everybody is familiar with Navagragas. And these are all started earlier. These Navagragas were in the lintel in North India. And they came into the actual worship only during the 11th or 12th centuries as a separate Mr. Prakash, can you keep on mute, please? So, people are familiar with this is the relative direction or location on which the Navagragas are set up. And this is a unique form of Navagraha where instead of each Navagraha facing its own direction, they are in a conference call mode, like in Purana, they are looking at Surya in center. The next part, the last before one part is on sculptures. Okay, so when you go to a temple, we see a lot of sculptures, panels, and then we get to know a lot of interesting things from them. What you are seeing is a Mukha Mandapa or Maha Mandapa of one temple, where all the pillars are not simple pillars, and they contain one exquisite sculpture in each of them. This is in South India near Pudukkottai. So when you see the sculptures can be of 4 types. One, religious sculptures. Second one, explaining the king and his deeds, like in Konark and other places. Or it can be the natural scenery, monkeys and others. Or the secular scene where the farmers and people working and doing their normal routine. If you see the sculptural panels, it can be Idihasa, Shiva Puranas, Saint, and then all the forms can be shown here. And where you see it, it can be in the base platform or in the foundation, or it is called Vetika. It is just before the foundation and the pillar starts, there is a band. This is called Vetika, or you can see it in the sculpture panels. And Deva questions behind the sanctum. On all four walls, there will be recesses where the secondary devas will be put in. This is where a lot of sculptures are there. And particularly, another interesting place is the staircases on the sides. You will see a lot of sculptures. And in the Torana or in the Gopuram foundation, there are a lot of sculptures panels. The interesting ones are the first one is a miniature panel. We are seeing Pulavangai, Early Chola. Here in this area, we are seeing very beautiful series of miniatures. Around 64 Krishna Leela miniatures on the bottom of this panel. This is the foundation, third layer of the foundation. The green ones are the panels. Like that, there is a Ramayana series of 64 images around the temple, which covers the images will be only this much size, only this much. And we are able to cover the entire temple, 64 complete Ramayana is available here. Very, very beautiful and exquisite structure. This is one end. The other end is the grand panels, the Konark Jagmoguna Pista component. This is the foundation base pedestal, where you see almost everything, the secular scenery, the king looking from this one, and Sutradhara, the architect looking from the panel, king giving a audience, foreign delegation with a giraffe, mythical Naga sculptures, the grand solar wheel, and Vyalas. Everything is available in beautiful band. So the moment you start exploring this, you will be able to know a lot about what kind of people was there and what kind of animals, what kind of activities, everything we'll be able to know from the sculptures. Okay, now let us see how to identify gods by the ornamentation, headgear, weapons, stances, and other things. Okay, there's another thing which we'll be able to explore. I am rushing, so we can take notes and then we can listen to it later. Can you identify this god? So the pointer is the elephant, and the skin. There's the elephant is cut into some. You can see 4 legs on sides, and then the skin is stretched. Obviously, it is Shiva. It is Gajasamhara Murti with complete set of weapons. So this is how we should be able to apply to identify whether it is Shiva or Vishnu or something. So these are all the pointers, like the asana stages, whether the god is sitting or standing or lying down or walking. Lying down, mostly we can close your eyes and say that it is Vishnu. And sitting or standing, you can judge on some other. Depending on the headgear, we will be able to see whether it is Shiva or Vishnu. And mudras will also form a part. And Shiva and Vishnu have got their own specific weapons. So these are the common weapons in Shiva. The drum or the axe or the sula or the deer or this string. If you see any of this, you'll be able to comfortably say that this is a Shiva idol. Similarly for Vishnu, the standard ones are Chank and Chakra, which will be used only for Vishnu and Vishnu Durga. And some of the Vishnu avatars use the plow, the pestle, musala, or the battle axe for Parasurama and some of the avatars. So if you see this, you can easily judge it is a Vishnu. And depending on hairstyle, you can also identify. If you have a ornamental long crown like this, it is usually for Vishnu or kings. If it is a matted hair done in a crown with the layers and circular thing, which is usually for the Devis and Vinayaka and other lesser gods. Jatamagada is primarily for dancing Nataraja. And the Jata Mandala, the spread one like this, is Buddha. And Jata Bara is a matted crown out of hair, which is typically refined for Shiva, Brahma, and Shaiva rishis. Now we have got one more hairstyle, which is the Corona hairstyle. This is what I'm having. We have a jittu on back, and then you have a hairband to retain your head. This is the latest hairstyle available during COVID times. And depending on the hastas, so we can also see what kind of a thing. When the yoga, the idols will have this kind of an yoga mudra. And normally your Dwarapalakas will be using the Vismaya and Suchi mudras, Darjani Suchi mudras are used by Dwarapalakas. Gods give Abhaya. Abhaya means, yes, I will give some. And then Varada means giving. Abhaya is, I will take care. Varada means, I will give. So with this, you will be able to see whether it is a fierce warring god, or it's a benefactory god, or it is a yoga type. And by stance also, we'll be able to see. This is a Samabhanga straight pose. Most of the central deities or the main deities will be of Samabhanga. And the ladies will be on a Abhanga, slightly shifted. Nadaraja will be always like this, Tribhanga. And some of the dancing people will be on Adibhanga, going into a different angle. And based on the way people are sitting, you will be able to identify in a different way. Harihara Chandrasaga will be standing in attention, and Kayat Saroga, Jain saints will be having both the toes aligned together. Chandigesa Trimurti will be standing in Sukhasana like this, whereas Dakshinamurti will be in Virasana, pressing a daman on his right leg. This is your normal Padmasana, which is used for Buddha. Yoga Narasimha, Dakshinamurti use this kind of stance. Vinayaka, because of his belly, it has got a special stance. Lalitasana, he can fold his legs and sit only in this way. Maharaja is a relaxed one, where Ayyanar and other deities do it. So by the stance itself, you will be able to identify some of the deities. So we are coming to the last part, which is about inscriptions. Just a perspective, if you see the total inscriptions, around 100,000 inscriptions are there, out of which 60,000 are in Tamil Nadu itself, out of which 56,000 are in Tamil. If you see the time span, most of the inscriptions are 16,000, around 851 to 1300. This is a period where Cholas ruled in Tamil Nadu. If you see, they have got the maximum number of inscriptions written in stone and as well as in copper plates. If you check by a recording medium, the rock or the stone takes maximum 4,000, copper plate 2,000. Bulk of it is during Chola period. So when you go to a temple, this is where most of the inscriptions are recorded in various locations inside the temple. That's why this is becoming more and more interesting. So when you see the inscription, the style changes over a period of time, and from there you will be able to identify the period. Okay, if you see this, the Tamil as a language was written using Tamil Brahmi script earlier. It was changed to Vattaluthu, and then during Pallava period they were using Sanskrit and other scripts. Later on Pallava Tamil taken. Chola period it changed, and this is how the Tamil has transformed from the 3rd century up to the 17th century. Each of these letters, A, B, A, E, E. So this is a good indicator into the period and the history. Where we'll be able to find the inscriptions. We can find it as a standalone slabs outside the old temples. You can find it in the walls. You can find it in the pillars. You can find it in the basement. And you can find it in the questions around the deities. So next time when you go to the temple, explore these areas and see what kind of inscriptions are there. If there is some defacing, something happening, please try to protect them. Why? Because what do we learn from the inscription? They are the longest standing archive document. We have documentation done in the 3rd century, which is now we are able to see after 1700 years. And this is a proof of validating whatever is there in books and stories by inscriptions. From this, we know how the dynasties worked, how the wars were done, what is the period of the temple, what is the old name of a area of the temple. Every king renames the village into a totally different one. So we will know what is the old name of the place, temple, and what kind of people lived there, local administration and finance, and what kind of punishments and then rules were there. All these are done as inscriptions in temples, and this is how we come to know about history. So temple is not only a prayer place, it is an archive. It talks about age-old stories. One example is this. Many of you would have been familiar with this. This is the Karavela inscription in Udayagiri, which is in Bhubaneswar. 17 lines of Prakrit in Brahmi. It was done during the 1st century. And it lists his 12 years of reign achievements. Every year I did this, like the details of his war, activities, conquest, everything comes in. And he also mentioned that I won the confederation of Dakshina kings. And this is a very good reference of all the activities and corroborated with other events. So this is how you know different things which are available in history. This is about how during Rajaraja period, instead of donating a fixed grant for giving banana offering to Ganapati, the king gave this as a loan to 4 merchants with interest. So everyday interest was given as a banana offering, and it was a perpetual investment instead of getting exhausted in 4 or 5 years. So if he had invested this for 360 kasu in bananas, it would have got exhausted in 8 years. But instead of it, he gives it to 4 local merchants, and the rate at the time was around 12.5 APR. And everyday interest is equal to 150 bananas. So the 4 merchants agreed to give 150 bananas daily as an offering. So it was a perpetual investment, and it is a clever, innovative investment. So we know a lot of such interesting details from inscriptions. This is the inscription given in Tanjore Big Temple. Temple is not for worshipping alone and then praying and getting the prasadams. So it was a center to unite all social activities and writings. Let us see how. So temple as a social hub, in addition to the worship and other things, it was a Vedic and literary education. The praharas and other things, they used to have schools, Vedic schools, and then basic schools, and then special teaching was done in temples during these days. And temples also functioned as Adhara Sala in Tamil, or the medical dispensaries. So the major research and some amount of dispensaries were in temple premises. So the mandabas used to be the central stage where a lot of local dances, dramas, and then singing, everything happened in the mandabas. That's why if you see the mandabas, major mandabas, they are open type. Natya mandabas are open type with only pillars for all side viewing. Then, like we said earlier, all our temple walls and then other things are working as an archive for all the inscriptions. Local administration, your local panchayat and things, the function, the meeting, everything used to happen under a banyan tree or in the temple premises, and the regulations and the final rulings were inscribed as inscriptions in the temple wall itself. Similarly, a lot of cultural festivals and events happened around temples, and they were the primary center for each of these. They also functioned as local treasury. So the local administration, they give the funds to the temple to manage. And also temples had a lot of land grants, and out of the revenue from the land grants, they used to give loans to the local people for their own development. And also the local administration used to give its collection to the temple for safekeeping till the time it is remitted to the central treasury. During calamity time, it was used as a support. Normally, the temple will be on the highest point with good vantage. And when floods are there, when so many activities happen, this is where all the affected people congregate and then get support from the temple granary. If you remember last year, there was a huge flood, and in Badami, Aihole, the Pattadakal area, the river was in spate, and then the entire area was flooded, and people went into refuge on the Pattadakal temples, and food was served from the temple for 4 or 5 days. It happened last year. Still, it is working as a calamity support center. So this is how the temples function as multiple centers. So knowing this, let us appreciate art. So by listening to this lecture for 1.5 hours and trying to understand about sculptures, our objective is to not to become a sculpture. Okay. For that, we need to be a sculpture learning so many arts, which I explained in the beginning. Our aim is to understand the complexity of art, the beauty of the sculptures, architecture created, and then enjoy the intricacies. Okay. Our Vimanas contain a lot of metaphysical concepts, like I explained about the yoga chakras, the metaphysical mapping to the body, and a lot of engineering design in constructing complex structures. Our sculptures convey beautiful depiction. In addition to beautiful art, they depict the myths, the Puranas, how the kings were like this, and how social life happened. The inscriptions all over the walls and structures give us how the society was at the time and how the economy functioned. The mandabas were acting as dance and community halls. The prakaras were used for teaching, medical treatment, granary. So in temple, we don't have a place of worship. We have a social center. So please, next time when you visit a temple, see from this aspect, understand and explain to others. And this is our duty, to understand the complexity or the multifaceted experience in a temple, appreciate the art, and also to protect the existing temples. So thank you. With this, we stop this presentation. If you have any doubts or clarification, you can connect with me in this contacts. My YouTube channel is Babu for Heritage. You can check up and then like and then get updates on new information like this. You can connect me with your phone or in Facebook to clarify your doubts. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me patiently for 1.5 hours. Hope this was an interesting discussion for you, and then you were able to learn a few things from this. So good. Thank you for the options. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and you can ask me. Yeah, tell me, Ashok.
Good evening, sir. Regarding you told me in the beginning, the temples. So those days they worship the god and the nature, other thing. Still near to Ooty, in the tribals, they do that. They have very nice temple. So the tribals, they do the offering, other things and all. It's really nice one. So what you said, all these things, I go back, all these things, really nice. What you said, and next time when I go temple, I have to, because I don't know that this one, what you said in the last one. So temple like a treasury, temple like this and all. So I didn't know that earlier. I know only the few things, but it's really good information for me. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Incidentally, Ashok, thanks for pointing out. This is the Toda temple. In many of my other presentations, I have highlighted and I have pictures of that also. Okay, since it is a short presentation, I have not gone to the details. Thank you for that observation. Okay, thanks, Ashok. Anybody else?
Yes, sir.
Go on, Peter.
Good evening, sir.
Good
So
evening.
at all the temples we visited, certain places we see outside the temple, at four corners they place food. It could be curd rice or any other form of food. May I know for what is that actually placed there?
On the four corner, they keep food.
Yes, sir. I seen this in Chamundeshwari temple in Mysore and even in a couple of other female deity temples where we visited. They put a little bit food and eat in every corner at all the four places. So I just wanted to know for what reason is it?
This might be part of the rituals of a particular type. See, Shiva temples, Vishnu temples, many of these follow different rituals in regional variations also. Okay. So they might be giving offers for the directional deities, like Dikbalas, for directional deities, they may be offer. A good observation.
Okay, sir. Thank you very, very much, sir. It was really an eye-opener for all of us and very knowledgeable and so much of information from you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, sorry, the timeline was a little tight, so I had
yes, very, very tight, sir. But you have given us so much of information. Though the time was short, but we have got a lot of info from you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, welcome. Anybody else? So, Ashish Maitri asked for my YouTube channel name, that is Babu for Heritage. It is there in the background, BABU for HERATAG. Anything else? So, a common question to all. So, what is the next time when you go and visit a temple? What is the key things you are going to look on? Some of you can give a feedback that will give a good indication on what you have understood from this. Anybody? Hello, Peter?
Sir, we would be the first thing, because I have been a tour guide, and the first thing I would see is the flag or the pataka, which you all have mentioned in the previous classes, and the Dwarapalakas who are at the entrance level, that we would, if we see them, like after I attended this class here, that is how I came to know when you showed the mudras, that what do they mean and who are the people who are at the Dwarapalakas, who is the deity inside.
Correct. Correct. The Dwarapalakas will be having Suchi and Darshani Mudras.
Yes, and one more thing that I learned from you is the Gajasamhara. Normally, I thought because in Belur Halebeedu, we've seen that there was a lady dancing in it. But after this class, now I've seen that it is Shiva inside the elephant skin. Am I right, sir?
Yeah, Gajasamhara Murti is very famous, particularly in southern temples.
Yes,
and
sir.
it is depicted in many designs. Beautiful dance.
Yes.
And he will be dancing inside the temple, the elephant skin itself.
Skin,
And
yes,
the
sir. Yes, sir.
poses will be too good. This way, by getting some insight and start exploring, the next time when you go to a temple, you will be able to identify different forms of Shivas depicted in their temple. And when you look at a Vishnu ideal, you will be able to see whether it is Madhava, Janardana, or whether it is a sleeping form, like that. So what I have presented and shown you here today is only the road signs to various paths. If you start exploring this, an interesting things are there. Ashish Maiti asked a question about what are the good books of iconography, and I explained in the beginning in the reference some good books. One is for iconography, Gopinath Rao book is there, Hindu iconography. There is a very good book. Stella Karamrish book is also Art and Architecture is also a good book. And the Indian Art and Architecture by S.P. Gupta is also a good one. I don't know the book handy. So these are fairly good, interesting things. Ashok asked one question: why more temples only in Tamil Nadu? I explained this in length, primarily because of Cholas and others were investing so much on temples. And if you see the South Indian history, okay, it was under Hindu stable rule right from Sangam days till 18th century. Only two aberrations were there. During 4th, 5th centuries, Kalaparas ruled for some time, where Jaina and other religions were dominant. That was for a brief period, less than 100 years. And during 13th century, there was an heavy invasion, Malik Kafur, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and then there was a rout. So many temples were damaged. However, the later Vijayanagara period, they recovered most of this. And if you see this, till 16th century, they were ruling the entire South India under control. So fairly minimal damage in Tamil Nadu, and some amount of damage in the Hoysala and Andhra region. Compared to the North Indian Gangetic plain as well as in the Sindhu plain, Gujarat plain, which were bearing the brunt of the invasions, and most of the temples were destroyed. If you see this, two specimens surviving is one Khajuraho complex, which was obscured and then which was hidden. The invaders came all the way, and then they were not interested in a forest, and then they went away. That's how Khajuraho escaped. And if you see the eastern side, Orissa big temples, they survived because the creator of Konark temple, Narasimha Deva, he was a very strong ruler like Rajaraja or Rajendra Chola of Cholas. And he had such a strong empire and set up that for the next 400 years, Muslims and other Mughal empires were not able to come inside Orissa, the core Orissa. So that is how Konark, Puri, and the other temples of this particular belt survived.
Okay, what do you feel about Indonesia? So Angkor Wat temple. So the influence by our people only is my opinion. And Indonesia, most of Indonesian temple and all, even Bali, if you go there, 90-95% of Hindus there, Hindu temples, and Ramayana, Mahabharata is more there. So what is your thing there? Because you said in every 3 square kilometers, there's one temple in Tamil Nadu. So compared to that, on those days, if you go to Bali or Indonesia, other places, even you can get more temples. What is your...
I don't have the statistics on number of temples in Bali or Indonesia or something. Okay. But the Indonesia, Bali and other areas. During Pallava period, a lot of Kalinga as well as Pallava influence, and later on Chola had a major trade and their influence was predominant, and many of the dynasties were somehow related to Pallavas and Kalingas of that period. So the impact and other things still continues. Even for Thailand now, the king's coronation ceremony from Chidambaram temple, the head priest goes there for the coronation ceremony.
Okay, the last question from my side. The thing is, if they have any special schools, the training they have given for making a temple or anything like in our place in Karnataka, they said, okay, we have a place called Hayole. There they have some training they have given and all. In Tamil Nadu, you have any special places during like teaching how to build the temple and all training and all that? Because more sculptures, more temples you can see in Tamil Nadu. Sorry, I've taken a long time. This is the thing, sir. Please, is the last question.
It's a good question, Ashok. The point is, Aihole, there might be a new sculpture school, and Adam Hardy is also creating infrastructure in training, and he is building a temple there in Karnataka based on the old Agamic definitions. Okay. In Tamil Nadu, we have the Sthapatis training, and we have a lot of Sthapatis who are given training on the hereditary form. People of the Sthapati clan, they are getting retrained, and now a lot of awareness and a lot of new schools are coming up. Earlier, till 7th, 8th century, the Agamas were there, but they were in Sanskrit in verses. It was spread by word of mouth from generation to generation. Only around 10th, 11th centuries later, very later, it started coming into writing and in terms of scriptures. And only now we are getting some of the palm leaves of this definitions getting translated into books and stuff. So there are some schools in South India sponsored by major industrial houses which are giving training to the Sthapati clan to revive this. A good thing here is that in Tamil Nadu, even if there is a small temple, local roadside Ganpati temple or something, the Sthapatis are trained, and at least the basic structure and form is still being kept, not like North India where you get all sorts of weird temple structures coming up. Thanks, that was a very good insightful question. Anybody else? Cool. I think I take this as one. So thank you all for an interesting evening and some interesting questions. If you have still any doubts or any questions on this, you can connect with me on these contacts. And this video may be hosted a little later after a week or 10 days in my YouTube channel also. You can see, and then you can take additional notes out of it. So till then, see you. Hope to see you in some other training. Have a great weekend. Enjoy.